The History of Hebrew Israelism with Dr. Michael T. Miller. Yeah, what's going on, party people? The place to be. I go by the name of the BK Apologist, transmitting all the way live. New York is the city. Brooklyn is the borough. What's good? What's popping? Hope everybody's doing well. Gotta say what's up to the party people in the chat. Hope everybody's doing well there. And of course, if you have not yet already, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend that's him again. And if you like how it goes down with BK Apologist, you could throw a little digital coinage via the PayPal link that's pinned on top of the chat. Or if you'd like to be a monthly supporter of BK, you could become a Patreon, where you get an assortment of goodies to enhance your personal Bible study. And today I am honored to have the distinguished Dr. Michael T. Miller. How are you doing, sir?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So for those who are not in the know of Mr. Miller, let me just talk about you here in front of you. Dr. Michael T. Miller works in Jewish studies and religious studies, specializing in Jewish mysticism and philosophy, and more recently, Black Judaism. His current research looks at the Black Hebrew Israelite movement, an autonomous African-American form of Judaism. In particular, he works on the African Hebrew Israelites, a community that immigrated to Israel in 1969 and have developed their own syncretic religious lifestyle there. This work has led to an interest in African-American religion generally, especially as it evolved during the 20th century. He gained his PhD at 2014, Theology, Jewish Studies from the University of Nottingham. His first monograph, The Name of God in Jewish Thought, offered a philosophical/theological examination of Jewish mystical traditions regarding the relationship of naming to identity, incorporating apocalyptic, rabbinic, and Kabbalistic texts analyzed through the lens of thinkers such as Rosenzweig, Benjamin, and Levinas. He taught in Jewish studies and philosophy at Liverpool Hope University from 2016 to 2019 with a research fellow at FAU Erlangen-Nuremberg, and currently works at the Polish Institute of Advanced Studies in Warsaw. The book that we will be discussing today is Black Hebrew Israelites, Cambridge Elements, New Religious Movements. And the book is about the Black Hebrew Israelite movement claims that African Americans are descendants of the ancient Israelites, and it has slowly become a significant force in African American religion. This element provides a general overview of the BHI movement, its diverse history, ideologies, and practices. The element shows how different factions and trends have taken the forefront at different periods over its 140-year history, leading to the current situation where diverse iterations of the movement exist alongside each other, sharing some core concepts while differing widely. In particular, the question of how and why BHI has become a potent and attractive movement in recent years are addressed, arguing that it fulfills a specific religious need to do with identity and theology, and represents a new and persistent form of Abrahamic religion. So what I'm going to do now is put the link to the chat so people can support the good doctor here in his studies. So, Mr. Miller, I guess the first question I want to ask you is, what drew you to this particular branch of Black Judaism to research?
Well, I first encountered what we call Black Hebrew Israelism at the end of 2009. I'd finished my master's degree in religious studies and taken a year out. I spent a few months in Israel, traveling and working on kibbutzes and stuff like that. And I encountered the group that live in Dimona, Beninese community, the African Hebrew Israelites. I spent a month living with them, worked in their school, had a lot of conversations, and I found them absolutely fascinating. One of the things that really connected with me was they're all vegan. They've been vegan as a community since the early 1970s. I've also, as you have,
Right.
been vegan or plant-based for quite a while myself. And the whole community, their outlook, their history and their theology just really intrigued me, and I came away really wanting to know much more, and I stayed in touch with them, tried to keep up on the news and developments. And it was only a few years after finishing my PhD, which became the first book that you talk about, The Name of God in Jewish Thought, that I decided to angle my research much more decisively towards first them and Ben-Ami's thought. And so I'll show you what was my second book, which is a book-length investigation of Ben-Ami, his theology, his thought, his kind of intellectual background, and that was published in 2023, 3 years ago now. And since then, I've become a lot more interested in all the different forms, because I spent a lot of time looking into what influenced Ben-Ami, what his precursors were, and trying to understand the movement as a whole that had kind of led to him and his community. So yeah.
Interesting. So let's go through the American iteration of Hebrew Israelism. We're going to take a nice walk down memory lane. So we know that during slavery in America, we know that the enslaved made an analogous connection between themselves and Israel when they were in bondage in Egypt. We know that through various slave narratives, from the slaves themselves, explaining how they saw a connection. But there seems to be a moment where at least for certain groups of the enslaved, it became more than just an analogous connection, and they really started seeing themselves as the actual descendants of these Israelites. So from your research, Dr. Miller, when do we start seeing that ideology starting to crystallize in America?
Okay, so the first thing I would want to say is I'm not completely sure it's always as clear cut as, there's not necessarily a difference between the identification with and the identification as. When we talk about something as mythical and potent as the Hebrew Bible and religion in general, then people see these kind of archetypes very differently. This isn't simply just a historical event. This is something that exists outside of time. And it's very much something that you can kind of tap into from anywhere. And for a lot of the enslaved peoples who were learning about the Hebrew Bible and the narrative of Exodus, etc., they may never have encountered anyone from the Jewish community. They would only know white Christians. And so the idea of Jews or Israelites being someone out there in the world was alien to them. So simply it becomes very easy to think, actually, this is talking about us. This isn't talking about about history at all. This is describing our situation now. And this is kind of a guide from God, from the divine, as to how we deal with this situation and how we get out of it.
Right.
So I don't think, obviously we can't reconstruct the past very easily at all, but I would challenged the idea that there was an initial kind of, oh, those people in that book are like us, or kind of we're in a similar situation, and then later a leap into we are those people. I think it was always more fluid than that.
Right.
But that's the first thing I want to say. But
Mhm.
to actually answer your question in real terms, we actually get the first emergence of what we now call Black Hebrew Israelism in the late 19th century with William Christian and William Crowdy, who created. They allegedly had these revelations from God, and then created their churches in Arkansas and another city in the American South in like the 1880s, 1890s, with this idea, with the preaching that Black Americans were
Right.
the Israelites, and then those churches very quickly spread all over the United States.
Those two individuals you just mentioned, did they exist during the same time period, or we're talking about different eras? Like,
Yeah,
did,
yeah.
and did they know each other then? If that's the case, were they aware of each other?
We don't know. There's no like record of them meeting or acknowledging each other, but there is a lot similar about their teachings. Interestingly, they were both Freemasons, like Prince Hall Freemasons
Mm-hmm.
as well, and that seems to be something very important.
Okay, so these forerunners of what we now call Hebrew Israelism, their doctrinal framework, was it very much a syncretism of Christianity and Hebrew, the Hebrew Bible, or were they subscribing to a particular branch of Judaism when they first started?
It definitely wasn't. It wasn't connected with what we call Judaism at all. There was no rabbinic influence. Mostly, these people had no connection with Jewish communities, no interaction with them. It seems to have, I mean, largely these churches, these two churches of Christian and Crowdy, emerged from the Christian holiness movement. They were both Baptist holiness preachers prior to their revelations from God, and they very much continued in that tradition. You can see in the doctrines and their emphasis on temperance, forgiveness, etc., and the location of Jesus Christ as the core part of the faith.
So they would be considered by other Christians Orthodox to a certain degree. Like, did they believe in like the divinity of Jesus? Did they believe in the triune nature of God, being saved through Jesus? Those kind of things. They would subscribe to those things. Interesting.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then from there, right? I guess, do we go into the Great Migration from there? Is that like the next major step, or is there something before
that? Okay, so scholars tend to talk about three or four waves.
Okay.
And really, so after these guys, the holiness, Christianity descendants, the second wave are just slightly prior. I forget exactly when the Great Migration, when the dates are for it now, but we're talking like 1910s, 1920s, specifically in Harlem, New York.
Right.
And then we get a very rabbinic kind of form that emerges largely from Caribbean or West Indian immigrants into.
Now, before New York, so are you saying that iteration, the main hub was in New York? Was there something prior to, maybe in Philadelphia or Chicago?
Not prior to that in Chicago. In there was one guy, Prophet Cherry, in Philadelphia, and he had a very early church. We don't know exactly when he started, and we think he was a little bit after Christian and Crowdy, and may even have been influenced by Crowdy, because Crowdy's church, as we say, spread all across the United States, and they had a big base in Philadelphia. So he might have learned some doctrines from them, then set up his own church.
Okay. So once it finds itself in Harlem, I'm assuming this is where some of the doctrine starts to change as well. Because you said earlier that it becomes more of a rabbinic subscription to Judaism. So who are some of the purveyors, the forerunners of that iteration of Hebrew Israelism in Harlem?
So there are two major ones, being Arnold Josiah Ford, who, let me think now, I think he was born in Barbados, if I remember rightly, from the Caribbean anyway. And he was actually, he was the musical director of Marcus Garvey's UNIA. So he was quite, established kind of person, quite well regarded. He actually suggested that the UNIA should adopt Judaism as its
main belief. Right.
Yeah. But Garvey didn't like that, being a Catholic. And he had a few congregations around Harlem. But there was also a bishop or rabbi, Wentworth Arthur Matthew, and he's probably the most significant and most important Black Hebrew Israelite ever, really. He lived for many years. He founded the Commandment Keepers congregation. He actually considered himself ordained by Arnold Ford, who was slightly earlier than him.
How did the rabbinic community in Harlem deal with them? Were they accepted? Were they looked at as fringe? Like, how was the response to those gentlemen?
The white Jews?
Yes.
White.
Yeah, the so-called white.
Yeah. That's it's funny, isn't it? Because actually a lot of like the One West and the more radical Hebrew Israelites, that they always say the so-called Negroes and the so-called
right, exactly,
descended from Edom. But yeah, it was a mixture of, definitely curiosity and also kind of dismissal, really. There were always in Ford and Matthew's congregations, there was always like a few, like 3-4 white Jews who would attend, and they'd be welcomed, and they'd participate in the services, etc., and maybe even help out with a bit of Hebrew teaching or something like that. But at certain points, other rabbinic Jews would kind of discover these congregations. They'd get interested and maybe write an article for one of the Jewish newspapers at the time. And it was always with a kind of, who are these guys? Who are these Black people who think they're Jews? Always kind of, they're obviously not, and they're getting a lot wrong about the things they should be practicing if they're Jews.
Right.
But so
now, if they are more focused on Judaism, I'm assuming they're now jettisoning a lot of what would be considered Christianity. So no longer is Jesus God, right? No longer is they don't subscribe no longer to a triune nature of Yahweh, right? They're more traditional, quote unquote, Judaism. Okay, so but they also, did they also, because earlier you said with those in Kansas City, they were Freemasons. Was that element still undergirding what was happening in Harlem? Were there other like esoteric broccolage of different ideologies integrating with their Judaism in Harlem.
Yeah, definitely. So one scholar, Jacob Dorman, has done a lot of work on this. His book, Chosen People, argued that that this is a bricoleur movement. That's exactly his term. That's probably why you used it. And he showed that they took elements from all over the place, some from Rabbinic Judaism, some from Anglo-Israelism, some from Freemasonry, some from the kind of esoteric mysticism that was around in the early 20th century, similar to people like Father Divine, as well as like the New Thought movement, and all these various things that were around in the air. They just took, we like that bit, we like that bit, we like that bit, and melded it into something completely new.
So when because you said they actually had some white membership, or at least there was some embrace from at least some form of the white populace. When did they become more militant in their stance within their ideology?
So there was a movement, even kind of within the Harlem groups. It expanded very rapidly. You know, became hundreds of members within a couple of decades, and started forming separate congregations. And some of the rabbis that Matthew ordained took things in a more radical direction. Some of them, on the coattails of kind of the Black Power movement, then wanted to become a lot more Afrocentric. They wanted to distance themselves from what they saw as kind of white European Judaism and say, you know, we want to express an authentic African Israelite kind of outlook. So they started changing the way they dressed. They started, you know, get rid of the organ in the worship and have drums instead. And things like that. But at the same time, so we're talking really kind of 1960s that this started happening in Harlem. At roughly the same time, things had been brewing for a couple of decades in Chicago and the Midwest, and there was a completely different genesis of the movement. So a particular preacher called Lucius Casey, at the beginning of probably like 1920 or so, he moved to Chicago. He taught himself to read so that he could read the scriptures and work out why Black people were in a terrible situation. And he came to this conclusion independently, this conclusion of Black Hebrew Israelism. And he developed a lot of doctrines that were much more radical than people like Wentworth Matthew or Crowdy before them. And this kind of birthed a Midwest movement that by the time of the 50s, the 60s, the 70s was growing much more radical, much more kind of proud, much more distinct from any kind of rabbinic Judaism or European influence.
Right.
And that's where you get people like the African Hebrew Israelites.
Right. So speaking of being distinct, their fashion sense becomes very interesting, right? And whether or not you like how they look, that's not what I'm angling for. But what was the inspiration for this particular garb? You know, because like in the 70s and 80s, I'm thinking more about like ISUPK. You know, they would have the leather with the studs, and not just the fringes at the border, but the fringes at the sleeves. Kind of like looking like a motorcycle gang in a sense. Like where did they get that from? Like what made them decide that this is an appropriate representation of their Judaism? I don't know if you have any info on that.
It's not my specialism. One scholar, Andre Key, has written a book chapter about this, about the kind of sartorial elements of Hebrew Israelism, and like you say, the kind of various One West groups. Each one has a very distinct but kind of related take on that. I don't know where all the leather comes from. I guess that's just an aesthetic choice. But things like the wrist things and some of the other things that they wear are actually traceable to biblical passages. Especially, I think there's some passages in Revelation and Daniel that describe putatively Jesus at the second coming, appearing in a particular way, and they try to replicate that. I think that's where some of that comes from.
Okay. So you made mention of them being inspired by the Black Power movement and having more of a embrace of the continent of Africa, but many of the One West derivatives of today seems to have it's a very interesting tension, because they will go out their way to show how they're from Africa, but at the same time they have a disdain for certain African tribes. I've heard them call them dirty, nasty Africans on the streets, but at the same time say we're from Africa as well. Where does that come from? So it's like they're pro-Black, but they're also anti-African. It's a weird, like, where does that come from?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to find any kind of historical background to it, but I guess ideologically, it comes from the Hebrew Bible, and because after the flood, Noah had three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth.
Right.
Ham is thought to be the ancestor of Black Africa. Shem, the ancestor of Asia, including the Israelites, and Japheth of the European peoples. Because the Hebrew Israelites identify themselves with Shem and believe they hail back through that kind of lineage, that differentiates them from the rest of Africa, Black Africa, which are Hamites. And they link that with, obviously, there was some kind of Black African involvement in the slave trade and the selling of human beings to Europeans. So they claim that Israelites, the Semitic Shemites, were sold by Hamitic Africans.
Right. So they have a distinction between Blackness and being an actual African tribe person.
Yes.
That's what they're trying to make a line of demarcation between, which is interesting, because most Black Americans would not make that distinction. So okay, that's interesting. So now we've been throwing the word One West a lot, right? Can you talk a little bit about that origin specifically? Like what is One West, for those who might not understand why we keep referencing that?
Yeah, sure. So One West is a form of Hebrew Israelism. I identify it as the fourth wave that came after the kind of Chicago Afrocentric wave. Again, it developed in Harlem, initially around the 1970s, but kind of gaining prominence really from the 90s onwards. It's probably it's the most well-known form of Hebrew Israelism now. It's what most people see and understand the most. It was originated by one person, essentially called Abba Bivens or Bibbins, who came from, if I'm remembering right, Philadelphia. And he traveled across the United States, came to Harlem, and was a member of Wentworth Matthews' Commandment Keepers in the late 50s and 60s. But he actually left the Commandment Keepers because by that time they'd completely rejected the New Testament and the Messiahship of Christ, and he held on to those ideas. So he split off, formed his own little, tiny group at that point in 1969, the Israeli Tanakh School, at an address which was West
125th Street. Yeah,
there you go. Yeah. And he started promulgating this very radical, very anti-white and anti-Semitic brand of Hebrew Israelism, which incorporated, the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, but took a radically kind of non-Christian approach to all of those scriptures. And this, he slowly attracted members. He passed away when, I forget now, in the 70s, I think. And One West as a movement gradually developed. It split, as they always do, into several camps, and then spread across the US as a much more militant form of Hebrew Israelism.
The doctrine of identifying Esau as the white man, aka the devil that the Bible speaks of, does that originate with One West, or is that comes before?
Yeah, it's a nice question. Thank you for asking that, because we don't know who came up with that first. Prophet Cherry mentions it. Wentworth Matthew also claimed that white Jews were descended from Esau, whereas black Jews were descended from Jacob. It's not a difficult kind of passage in scripture to find if you're thinking in racial terms and thinking very much about black and white. Then this description of two brothers, Jacob being smooth of skin, like a lot of African descended people are, and Esau being red and hairy, like a lot of Europeans are. We're pink and covered in body hair. It's not difficult to isolate that passage and think that says something about where this racial binary comes from. So people can see that independently and come to the same conclusion. We don't know whether. So I mentioned that Wentworth Matthew had this idea. I think I found a newspaper article in the 1930s, where he mentions this. However, in the 1950s in Chicago, this is being talked about as well. Okay. However, it really got picked up by Bibbins and the One West guys as a core part of their ideology, and it's something they talk about a lot.
Right. Another part of their ideology, actually, this is a huge component of their evangelistic machine, is known as the 12 tribe chart. I was wondering if you could give us some information on the origin and evolution of that particular component.
So 12 tribes chart aligns the 12 tribes of Israel with various different, mostly native peoples around the Americas. and claims that these people are descendants of, Mexicans are one tribe of Israelites. And Brazilians are another tribe, etc. And African Americans, of course, are the tribe of Judah.
Right, right.
This seems to have come as a revelation to one early One West member called Araya. He seems to have systematized this, and this has been the inheritance of all of the One West descended groups.
Right, right. Okay. Now, prior to the year 2000, there was some rumblings. It wasn't as unified as they would like people to think. But after the year 2000, something huge happened. I was wondering if you can speak on that a little bit. The whole Y2K thing.
So you mean the prophecy?
Yes.
Yeah. So there had been a prophecy that in the year 2000, Jesus would return, and the apocalypse or Armageddon would begin, which would lead to effectively a global race war where the Israelites would be victorious, and they would be installed as the rulers of the earth, and there wouldn't be many other people left, but who would be basically enslaved. This never happened,
right.
Which was something of a disappointment and a disruptive occurrence to those who had preached this only a few years earlier, and who were quite looking forward to this event and change in social structure. This was a part of One West ideology. I think it was like all or most of the One West groups had, through the 90s had preached this.
Well, it was mainly ISUPK.
Really?
But there wasn't really other groups in Harlem besides them.
Okay.
But there was rumblings of there being splits, but it seems that the Y2K fiasco really kind of make that happen.
IUIC,
because how do you reconcile a failed prophecy, right? So
yeah.
But
interestingly, that same prophecy was made by Cherry. It's mentioned in a book from the 60s, I think. He mentions exactly this prophecy. So it does make you wonder about the linkages between these different groups.
Right.
But yeah, like you say, it's that must have had quite a destructive impact on One West and ISUPK.
Right. Can you speak a little bit on their hermeneutic lens? Like, what is their methodology for understanding scripture?
Are you asking me about Black Hebrew Israelites or One West, or
the One West? The One West. No,
okay.
We'll stay with the One West for now.
In general, I would say, the Bible is entirely read through the Black American experience, and almost everything that the prophets predict throughout the Hebrew Scripture is applied to the last 400 years or so within the United States of America. This is their only kind of frame of reference. In terms of the way that they actually read Scripture, I've been thinking that it demonstrates some kind of hallmarks of American Protestantism. Excuse me. Generally, like there's some kind of traditions of interpretation and some ideological biases that you can see there that are the inheritance of the Christian environment they come from, and the particular kind of Christianity that's practiced in the US.
You mean like Manifest Destiny, and that America was the anointed country, like that kind of a vibe, but the Black version of that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and also this kind of unchallenged belief that individuals can read the Bible unmediated, without seeking any kind of tradition of interpretation, simply read it and understand the words, and simply perceive what is meant. And that's quite it's something I think that a lot of people don't think about. It's an assumption when we're looking at scriptures, things that are 2,500 years old, that we can just read them in our own language and understand them without needing to refer to any other authorities.
Right. Because there's various forms of context, right? There's the linguistic context, historical context, understanding the background of the original audience and writer, right? All those things are needed if you're going to understand any historical document, let alone the Bible, right? So they don't seem to want to do that, right? It's more of they smuggle in their own modern day sensibilities into the text. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So the idea of vengeance is a huge pull, at least with this iteration of Hebrew Israelism. But what's the origin of when Christ comes, we get to be the oppressor, we get to be the enslavers? Is that a one West thing, or is that something that came prior to them? This particular belief.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. It's it's been generally held to be a one West belief. I've recently been doing some work on Chicago groups in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and including a very famous and important figure, Rabbi Robert Devine, who was actually taught by Wentworth Matthew and ordained by him. And in their writings, you can actually see exactly that doctrine, even before One West existed. And I don't know whether they developed that themselves. They could have done, whether it was a teaching of Lucius Casey that they picked up. I'm sure it didn't come from Wentworth Matthew. But yeah, it's and I don't know whether it transmitted from Chicago to One West, or whether One West developed it independently. Both are possible.
Okay. Now I'm curious, and I'm kind of being a little silly at the same time with this next question, but enslavement is a business, right? It's a form of income. It's an economy. It has various moving parts, right? It's like someone has to take care of the slave. There's housing, right? You would have to keep in charge of the amount of produce that's being made. It's a business, basically. Have you heard them explain the business of the revenge? Like once they take over, do they know, like, all right, you're gonna have this, you're gonna take care of the Excel spreadsheets, you're gonna be the accountant? Like, has there ever, because if you plan on completely conquering the world, that's a business. Like, you need various different people and departments. Has there been any discussion within these groups about like how that works?
I haven't been privy to much. I guess they tend to keep me out of the loop on things like that.
I wonder why.
But let's remember, that they're going to have God's help in all of this.
Right.
So they, it's interesting that with all of these apocalyptic predictions and stuff, they don't need to actually put anything in place themselves, because they're not going to do any of this stuff. All of this,
It's gonna be done by God, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they might just partake as God allows them to do.
Right.
So I mentioned to you just before we went on air, my barber here in Warsaw, in Poland, where I live, was a member of IUIC, and we often talked about the doctrines and stuff. And he shared with me some things that I hadn't heard anywhere else. He told me that that in this messianic age, the world will be divided into city-states, where each city will be ruled by an Israelite and populated by a mixture of Israelite subjects and Gentiles who are being taught how to live according to God's law. And people would be punished as necessary by the Israelite king, and they would even worship that Israelite king of their city rather than God directly, which is a pretty strange claim for a monotheist.
Yeah, that's interesting. And this is from the IUIC, someone who's from IUIC. This is what they teach.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I don't know whether that was his own interpretation of things or whether that was something he'd heard from the leadership.
That almost sounds a little bit like Mormonism, right? Each man becomes a god and has his own, right? But
yeah.
So speaking of the apocalypse, right? The coming of Jesus, or Yahushai, as the one Westers would say, that he's coming with spaceships, UFOs, flying saucers, right?
Yeah.
Where does this understanding come from, that they think that the chariots are actual spacecraft? Where does that come from? I got some ideas, but I would like to hear your take.
So I think there are probably two places we can link that back to. The first would be the Nation of Islam, which still has under Louis Farrakhan, doctrine of the mothership,
the mother will, right.
Yeah, which is waiting behind the moon, I think, for when the apocalypse will come, and then it will come to Earth and annihilate white people and all the heathens. So I think that idea of apocalyptic divine spacecraft probably comes partly from there, but also there is this, the visions of Ezekiel in the Bible, and the Nation of Islam tie their doctrine to that as well. But a lot of people independently have said this stuff that Ezekiel is describing sounds a lot like spaceships to me.
And well, they get that from Daniken, right? And his book, The Chariot of the Gods, right? The whole ancient alien thing, so they both are getting it from there, but I don't think they know that, so but okay, cool. So so before we leave, Dr. Miller, again, thank you so much for your time. Definitely appreciate this. Can you talk a little bit about future writings, or if you're doing any lectures anywhere, please plug away.
Thanks. So kind of there's a bit of an exclusive for you here. No one else really knows about this, but I've come into possession of some documents in the last few months from 1950s, 60s, and 70s Chicago Hebrew Israelites. I've been looking a lot at their doctrines and the way they've evolved, and especially some really fascinating precursors to later doctrines, especially things that evolved in One West groups and in Ben-Ami's community. And I'm putting together a plan for a book looking at that, and and the significance of kind of Chicago and Midwest Black Hebrew Israelism for
Nice.
the movement more generally.
Well, we got to have you back once that book is done.
Yeah.
We got a few minutes left. Would you mind taking a couple of questions from the chat? Would that be okay?
Yeah,
All
sure.
right, guys. So here's your opportunity. If you want to ask a question, write the word question first, then the actual question, and then we'll highlight it, and the good doctor will have at it. All right. So now I know it takes a while for it to populate. So let me ask. How hard was it for you to gather the data that you had for this particular book? Was it an easy thing for you to do, or did you have to like scour some dark, dingy basement, to get this?
It took a lot of work, a lot of time, and quite a lot of money to, buying rare books that popped up online, interviewing quite a lot of people, making contacts, and also, I'm thoroughly indebted to about a dozen different archivists around the United States in various libraries, universities, and other institutions who very helpfully scanned material for me. And it took a lot of time, a lot of Google searching to learn where that stuff was. But
yeah, I mean, in my community, I'm what's called an urban apologist, and I deal a lot with Hebrew Israelism, also what's known as the Black conscious community, or the committed community, and they love to throw the word scholarship around very loosely. A lot of people call themselves doctor and they don't have a doctrine. And the reason why I wanted you to speak on that, because I want people to understand that it's not easy when you want to be a scholar, and to have a robust, detailed research methodology. You can't just, I did my research. Well, do you know what research is? Do you know the various forms of research? It's like it's a very heavy task. So if you could speak a little bit more on that.
Yeah, sure. It was definitely, it was a few years behind the writing of each of these books that I showed. And then there's a good 10 or 15 years of familiarizing myself kind of with the material, with the ideas, with the communities before that. It's definitely more than watching a few YouTube videos.
Absolutely. And I definitely appreciate your hard work, because it definitely makes it easier for me to get the information, so I personally am grateful for your work, Doctor. And it doesn't seem like we're getting any questions. So Doctor, if you have some final words before we sign off.
I suppose the one thing to remember about Hebrew Israelism is that it's a very, very diverse movement, and even considering it one movement, it might be a bit deceptive, because different forms of it have been founded independently by different groups and different individuals. There's no linearity and there's no centrality to it either.
Okay. Oh, okay. Here we go. We have one here. But I don't know if it's a Hebrew question, but can Dr. Michael talk about the origin of the serpent seed doctrine? I don't know if that's a Hebrew Israelite doctrine, though. Have you come across this, Doctor?
Yes, actually, yes. So this is referring to Garden of Eden and the idea that the serpent actually impregnated Eve, and Cain, the murderer of Abel, was the serpent's offspring rather than Adam's. And there's a whole theoretical kind of lineage that you can trace through the Hebrew Bible of descendants of the serpent who are, and this kind of feeds into this Esau, manifestation of evil idea. This was it was actually a big part of
British Israelism. That's what he says.
Yes. Yeah, Christian identity, especially the kind of extreme racist form of British Israelism. But it does actually, you can see a link there to Black Hebrew Israelism, and it does pop up in a kind of way in some of Ben-Ami's thought, and I'm not sure whether he might have got that from someone else. It doesn't seem like an idea he would come up with.
So we have a question here from Aaron. How would you categorize Hebrew Israelites who claim to acknowledge the deity of Jesus?
How would I categorize them? I mean, there are different. So, the people in the Church of God Saints of Christ, like Crowdy's denomination, acknowledge the deity of Christ, as far as I know, and I think they still do. And I would consider them to be kind of on the periphery, like a form of Christianity, effectively. Not everyone would agree with me on that, but I consider them to be both Christian and Hebrew Israelite. And then, of course, One West also acknowledged the deity of Jesus. They believe in that fundamentally, and they've got a completely different take on it, and they're not Christian.
It's more they lean more to like Arianism form of that. Like he's divine, but he's a created divine being, as opposed to Jesus being part of the triune nature of Yahweh, as Christians would look at it. So, but yeah, which for me, I feel like they need to be more honest with that, because they'll make it seem as if they are agreeing with the traditional understanding of Christ until you ask the follow-up question. Like, oh, okay, so you don't really mean that type of Jesus. You mean something else. But a lot of them will speak in Christianese to kind of pull you in from my experience. So
I think just quickly related to that, there's a thing about the kind of divinity of all Israelites.
Right, because the One Westers will say that they are the gods of this earth. That they definitely teach that.
Yeah.
And they'll use Psalm 82 as their proof text. So yeah. But okay, cool. All right, guys, we're gonna stop with the questions. Thank you, Doctor, for spending some time with us. And it's been great. I hope you could come again.
Yeah.
And yeah, so with that being said, it's Dr. Miller and BK Apologist signing off. Good day.